shouldn't have to drive it all day. You can drive for hours. Welcome everybody to DisruptEDtv, where even the smallest ideas can make a big difference in your school. Our guest today, Joe, is a very special guest on a very important mission, talking about teen suicide prevention. Actually, her name is Dawn Doherty. She is the Executive Director of the Society for the Prevention of Teen Suicide.
That is correct. Yes.
And welcome to our program. And
thank you.
I mean, it's a concept. It's a problem that requires a certain amount of reverence, but you have to speak frankly about it, or you won't solve the problem. Right. So
that is absolutely.
That's
correct.
why we're so fortunate to have you here with us today, Dawn. How big a problem is teen suicide? Maybe you can help us.
Teen suicide, it is an issue across the world. But with respect to in the nation, we lose about 5,900 adolescents aged 10 to 24 each year. Every year. And that number is increasing, unfortunately, every year.
That number is going up. I mean, you're working very hard at trying to manage that number by educational programs, and we'll talk about all that. But that number is going up.
It is.
You know, the reason why I looked a little bit through your material. Dawn has a lot of material in a brochure that she shared with us, but you can also get this on your website. You'll tell everybody how to do that later.
Absolutely, yes.
All the material that's here is also online.
And a lot more as well.
And I'm looking at this DVD in particular, Not My Kid. Like, this is not something that could happen to me. That's a blind spot, isn't it? It
is, and unfortunately, any family may be impacted at any point in time with suicide, and that's one thing we found, and suicide does not discriminate. Mental illness, mental health issues is a problem that should be on everyone's radar. And more so it is today than it was 13 years ago when our organization was founded. Wow. And so we are grateful for the increased awareness and certainly this opportunity, as well as the ability to have conversations and educate community members, because it really does take a village to keep our kids safe and our community members.
That's important. Characterize the problem for us a little bit. The age range is?
With respect to adolescent is age 10 to 24.
Okay.
And so the statistics for children ages 10 to 14 is increasing quite dramatically over the last decade. And so we are really focusing on what's called upstream prevention and bringing important life skills, coping mechanisms, stress management to children before they hit a point of crisis. And so there is a new focus on social emotional learning and programs that really address the K through 5 age demographic, not as straight suicide prevention.
But just mental health.
Mental health.
And how can I feel good about myself?
Feel
and how
good,
can I feel like there's a way forward no matter how, when our frustrations overcome us, we take drastic action. And we're not mature enough to think our way through that at
That's
these ages.
Correct. No, and the adolescent brain actually does not fully develop until I believe it's 24 years old.
Really, 24 years old.
And so, with respect to that, you are working in a more impulsive nature than an adult would be.
Well, and that means that you're more likely to make a mistake that you can't recover from. And that's
that is correct.
I keep going back to Not My Kid. We're not just talking about underprivileged children. We're not just talking about kids with poor grades. We're talking about white honor students, captains of football and basketball teams.
Again, suicide does not discriminate, but some of our higher risk student populations are definitely honor students because of the stresses that society and themselves do put on each other, as well as certainly students who are bullied or those doing the bullying. Our LGBT students are at an increased risk, more so around social acceptance and family acceptance, as well as certainly students who have made a previous attempt.
There's so many factors involved.
There are,
I mean, anything we think we know about it is only really the tip of a big iceberg.
Absolutely, and that's a very important thing to keep in mind. When an individual does make the decision to take his or her life, there are almost always a multitude of factors. And so, mental illness can be, diagnosed or undiagnosed, as well as then the additional stressors. So relationships, self-esteem, bullying, traumatic events, and certainly even exposure to suicide, which is why it's so important that we talk about it in an educated way and in a safe way.
Right.
Well, when you go into a school where maybe they've lost a student already to it, a big part of the counseling is to make sure that nobody else thinks that that's a legitimate path forward for them.
Absolutely, and that's some of the resources that we do address on the website are around memorialization, because that's one thing. We do know that suicide can be contagious in the effect that if there are vulnerable individuals and they see that someone is getting, a wonderful amount of attention in their death, in an illogical state of mind, they may be inclined to act on those feelings.
Act on those feelings in an irreversible way. That's the tragedy.
Correct.
And there's suicide pacts and things too, correct?
Yes, they do exist, certainly. And so the work that we do with the schools on a more comprehensive level is addressing traumatic incidents all in the same way. So if there is a student who dies in a car accident or a medical issue or suicide, now we are dealing with a lot of substance abuse deaths as well, but they all need to be taken into account in the same way. And so have the policies and procedures in place before something happens.
That's important. Now, from the point of view of the people who watch our program, it could be teachers, they could at any level, or school administrators. What do they have to watch out for? What is it they need to be on the lookout for?
Sure. One thing with all of our programming, you will see the commonality of, for the school staff, there's a critical but limited role. They are in an ideal spot to recognize the warning signs in a student. So it's really important for them to be aware of the warning signs. And the acronym FACTS is what we use to help people remember. So it's feelings, actions, changes, threats, and situations. And so our online training, which we do offer absolutely free, has been completed by over 200,000 educators across the country, really focuses on this, the warning signs of suicide, how to respond appropriately and effectively, and refer that student to the trained professional in your building, and also to be aware of the local resources.
Okay. Now, the Society for the Prevention of Teen Suicide provides training to schools?
We do. We have our online training that fulfills the requirement in New Jersey. There's a 2-hour requirement for 2 hours of suicide prevention training at least every 5 years for public school teachers. And across the country, there are 29 states with similar forms of legislation. So we offer that absolutely free. We can also provide that training in person to larger groups of faculty and staff. And then we have a more comprehensive curriculum that we can implement as well, which helps to build a competent, caring community.
That's great. Look, we need to take a break. When we come back, though, this is a very important subject. I want to make sure everybody understands how they can engage with you to address this problem.
Excellent. Thank you.
We'll be right back with more of Dawn Doherty, Society for Prevention of Teen Suicide, after these words on Disrupted TV.
Stick around.
Thank you.
Thank you.
I went to college right after high school, but it didn't work out. After a few years in the workforce and the birth of my son, I decided to give college another try. At Brookdale, something clicked. I met amazing professors and found a major I was passionate about. I made the dean's list, landed a great internship, and now I'm pursuing my bachelor's degree. Thanks to Brookdale, I have what it takes to see my dreams through. I'm Tara Boyce, and I came to Brookdale to give college another try. I never imagined I would find my passion.
Welcome back, everybody, to DisruptEDtv. My name is Al Cini.
My name is Joe Osamendi.
And our guest today is Dawn Doherty from the Society for Prevention of Teen Suicide. In our last segment, we began to talk about how you would engage with the school to prevent. I mean, it's a preventive program.
Correct.
And maybe you can talk a little bit about what that engagement is like.
Sure. And so our desire would be to engage with the schools before they experience a traumatic incident. And unfortunately, our experiences are that a school district will lose 2 to 3 students before they are inclined to bring in the prevention services. And so our more comprehensive training is really in 3 parts. And so we help in a sustainable model of empowerment for the schools to train them, in policy and process around traumatic incidences.
Okay.
So we review what is in place and help them enhance or build a crisis team to respond if there is a traumatic loss. And the second part of the curriculum really delves into the intervention process with the school support staff, because it's not a requirement for school counselors, administrators, school nurses to necessarily be comfortable with the topic of suicide or doing an assessment, having a conversation with a child or their parent. So our intervention model does address this and really provide them with the confidence and competence to deal with a student who may or may not be at risk.
Wow.
The third piece of the curriculum is the evidence-based piece that includes lesson plans to integrate into the student health classes for middle school and high school. And so these really address, for students, the warning signs of suicide, help-seeking behaviors, identifying a trusted adult that they would go to if themselves or a friend is in need, but also the knowledge that if a friend discloses to them, they can't keep it a secret. It's really important to get help, because there is help out there. And so the programming all combined, again, builds that competent, caring community so that a student is more inclined to ask for help. They know it's okay not to be okay, and that there are resources out there. And for the trusted adults, the school administration, the teachers, the coaches, they all know the appropriate response if a student does come to them.
Does come to them. And does that conversation typically start anywhere in particular, like with the nurse or the guidance counselor, or?
It really depends on the school environment and also the student. And some students may go to their food service workers or their bus driver, their janitor. These folks have regular and direct contact with the students, and so they may be the one that they go to. That they
confidant.
Exactly.
But the important thing to note here is that before they take that final, what could be final action, they do have conversations with people who, if they're tuned to this, could pick up the story and move it in a different direction and prevent the tragedy.
Correct. Statistically, 7 in 10 individuals will exhibit some sort of warning sign before making an attempt or dying by suicide. And so yes, and our belief is wholeheartedly educating the community around the warning signs of suicide and the way to approach it, not being afraid to talk about it, will help save lives.
What is the length of one of your engagements?
The online training that's free is 2 hours.
Okay.
And our in-person training is 3 full days. So it's 3, including breaks, 8-hour training days. But again, it's a very sustainable model. And we provide all of the tools and resources for a school to continue on with the prevention process without our direct interaction.
Okay.
Now, you mentioned students from the age of 10, which I find incredible, but maybe it's not so incredible.
It's not, and unfortunately, even on, there was just an 8-year-old in Newark last week who died by suicide, and a few weeks back in Colorado, there was, I believe, either 8 or 10, and also in California. So you were hearing increased instances of it.
So these are kids who feel as though there's no other alternative. There's no other way out of whatever pain they're experiencing, except by doing this. And but there are ways to see this coming.
There are ways to see it coming.
And ways to protect that child so that they don't feel like they have to go that way.
Absolutely. And another component of our programming is presentations for parents and helping them to understand the importance of raising resilient teens. That's the title of that presentation. Resiliency. Again, letting your kids know that it's okay not to be okay. Letting them know that it's okay to ask for help and that there is help out there. We always try to instill hope in individuals, and especially in our area, there are a variety of resources available from the crisis helplines and text lines, and certainly a multitude of online resources as well.
Are there hot spots for this? I know that this is the kind of thing that can happen anywhere, so you shouldn't think that just because you're not in a hot spot, you don't have to worry about it. But Is it more likely an urban phenomenon or a rural phenomenon? Or?
I mean, it's more of an anecdotal response, but it does happen more so in the suburban areas
Really?
than in the urban environments. I mean, speculation is that in the more urban environments, kids know that life is hard and that they're going to be faced with challenges. And
So they're more resilient.
they are more resilient, not always in the most healthy forms of coping,
Sure.
but they do know that, again, life is hard. And so that's what we're working with, communities around New Jersey and across the country, to just build that foundation of support for the students and, hopefully instill life skills and enhance what we refer to as protective factors that will stay with them through life.
Wow. So a school board out there that represents a community that might be affluent could influence the school district to bring in a program like this, even though they're kind of inclined to think, not my kid. That
would
whole
be,
idea that's not my kid, it can't happen here.
correct, and that would be preferred. And again, our prevention work, it's evidence-based. It's been implemented successfully in pockets across the country, and we know that suicide can be preventable. It is preventable, and part of that is just dispelling the myths around suicide. Some individuals think that if you talk about suicide, it might lead someone, to take action if they've been having suicidal thoughts. That's not true. Talking to an individual, especially directly, opens up that conversation. It gives them that level of comfort to ask for help. And so we're really working to reduce the stigma around suicide and mental illness, and implementing prevention curriculum as preventative methods will actually help do that as well.
And it's so important. I think when we come back from our next break, we can talk more about what that conversation is like.
Sure.
I know that's something you have a lot of experience in. We'll be right back with more DisruptEDtv and a terrific guest, Dawn Doherty, after these messages.
Thank you.
See you in a minute.
Welcome back to DisruptEDtv. My name is Al Sini.
I'm still Joe Esmindy.
And Joe, this is such an important subject.
Absolutely.
We have such a great guest, such a great resource. I want to make sure we get everything we can out of this.
Thank
because
you.
It's so valuable.
Right.
Dawn Doherty is the executive director of the Society for the Prevention of Teen Suicide.
Correct.
You were telling us during the break that the organization was formed by two fathers in 2005. Maybe you could relate that story?
Sure. Each of them, unfortunately, lost a teenage child to suicide. One was 15, one was 14. And at that point, it was not on their radar. Parents weren't talking about it. Pediatricians were not talking about it. Schools certainly were not addressing it. And so the gentleman wanted to, really initially their goal was to help one family in Monmouth County avoid the devastation of what they went through. And so one of the first initiatives of the organization was to have that legislation that we had mentioned earlier passed in New Jersey. And so New Jersey was the first state in the country with the form of legislation successfully passed, and that happened in 2006, so very quickly.
Very quickly, sure.
And
probably because a lot of people really do recognize that this is a bigger problem than a lot of people may want to admit.
Correct.
And that couldn't have passed fast enough, based on what you're telling me.
Absolutely, and I mean, we would love to see all 50 states have, a form of legislation, and right now the legislation really is focused on the school staff being educated, but we also feel it's equally as important to educate the students and to have that conversation and then bring the parents into the conversation as well.
The whole community really has to get involved.
The whole community, yes. And when we do our comprehensive training, we also encourage the school districts to bring in, members from the faith-based community, as well as law enforcement, any mental health professionals, and key stakeholders in the community, because it really, we say suicide prevention is everybody's business.
The more people become aware of it, the better it's going to be.
Well, and the more you talk about it, that's such a good point, because if you're afraid that talking about it is going to give the kid an idea, they already have the idea. The truth is, they didn't get this idea because you talked about it. The idea grew because nobody was talking about it.
Correct.
So it's that absence of conversation that causes that fails to prevent the teen suicide. You mentioned you have a clinical director, executive director.
That is
you have
correct.
A clinical director as
We
well.
do.
Okay.
Yes, and she's a licensed professional counselor with school-based experience as well, and she's phenomenal. and she does the majority of our school trainings and presentations, as well as our presentations to parent groups and other key stakeholders in the community. We have had conversations with youth-serving organizations, Girl Scouts, Boy Scouts, Big Brothers, Big Sisters. Also will hopefully be presenting to some of the local coaches, because again, all of these folks have contact with children and may or may not be their trusted adults.
It's funny, you may not have thought about it as a problem in the athletic department of the school, but it very well could be.
Absolutely.
So, in fact, maybe there's more stress even there. And you mentioned too during the break that it's not necessarily because a family has had problems. This could happen in happy families.
It can, and it does very often.
Okay. So it's not just conflict between the parents, it's not conflict in the household, although that wouldn't help.
Yeah.
It could happen even in the absence of that.
It can. I mean, oftentimes you will hear stories of, children who are, very athletically inclined, academically excelling, very involved in their community, but sometimes they miss that outlet to ask for help, or, for whatever the reason is, just hesitate to talk to someone. But the underlying message with all of our programming is really to encourage that conversation.
Really, to make sure that conversation happens. And,
Absolutely.
And tell me a little bit about that conversation. I mean, if maybe I'm concerned that my child is withdrawn or has changed, going through your facts model.
Sure.
How do I start that conversation?
Very honestly, be very direct. And just ask your child or, the adolescent that you're concerned about, are you thinking about suicide? Have you thought about taking your life? Make it a yes or no answer. And then there's really no gray area. And you can even share your concerns with them and express, I realize that, your grades have been slipping. Is something going on? How can I help? Can we get you help? Make them, again, aware that it's okay to ask for help and that help's out there. And, certainly to make them aware that even if they don't feel comfortable talking to you as a parent, they should go to a coach, a teacher, their faith-based leader, and ask for help with any situation. Talk to somebody.
The only way I can mess that conversation up, as I imagine it, not having a conversation would be way number one. Way number two would be in the conversation telling them something like snap out of it, or I can't believe you feel this way.
Absolutely.
As soon as I close the doors to alternatives to suicide, I leave them with only that option. Isn't that right?
And it absolutely can be right. And so in the conversations and in the information on our website and presentations that we do, we always say, to be positive and not to close that door. For a child, though, a breakup, you realize you're going to have many, many breakups through life.
Sure.
But in that instant, it is the end of the world
It's the end of the world for them.
And so really validating those feelings and, again, helping them through it. And if you're not the person, getting them to the people who can, help. And that's another conversation with parents is, as a parent, you have your pediatrician, you have your kid's dentist. If your kids play sports, you probably have the orthopedic on speed dial.
Probably.
But most parents don't consider having a mental health professional, as part of, their group, their wellness.
To need a mental health professional is to admit that you failed as a parent.
Right.
But that actually is not true. A mental illness is not something that you can or, can create.
Yeah.
It is there. Similar to, any other health issue. And that's one thing, as the thought process around mental health changes and becomes more of a public health concern, and the stigma is reduced around it. If you were diagnosed with cancer, would you have shame in saying that?
Seriously, would you have shame in that? And that's...
But if you had anxiety or depression or a mental illness that you were struggling with, unfortunately, there is still that social stigma and the shame around it, but that's what we're working to reduce and eliminate.
And really. That's part of what your program does. It helps people deal with that. I think from my point of view anyway, the importance of having that conversation, I think you've explained to us how it can actually be an easy experience to have. Not having the conversation is one of the ways to fail. You just don't want to not have the conversation.
Correct.
You're saying too, the numbers are getting worse a little bit.
The statistics, the rates are increasing. The number of teens that are taking their life is increasing, And, you know, it's from a prevention point of view, and it just continues to be challenging. You know, within the schools, there are administrative challenges that we do fight. You know, one of the biggest challenges is the stigma around it.
Right.
And, you know, parents, you know, being afraid to have that conversation, one, because they aren't educated on how to have it, but also because they're afraid of the outcome.
Yeah, absolutely.
But really, they need to know that it's okay. And
It's
there is
okay.
help.
We can have this conversation.
And there are, you know, a multitude of clinicians available. You know, certainly if a parent or a school staff member has an immediate concern, you have to call the emergency room, call 911, you know, have that addressed immediately.
important,
You
right.
don't want to put something off as a school staff, bringing it back to school.
Right.
If you recognize something on a Friday afternoon, you don't want to wait until Monday morning.
No, you don't. Well,
You
this is
need-
not
you
something that will
need
wait till
to-
Monday morning.
Exactly.
Yeah, you deal with it right away.
Exactly.
Don't be afraid to reach out.
Do
No,
not be
definitely
afraid
not.
to reach out.
But we're at that part of our program. I mean, the good thing about this is while the numbers may not be heading in the direction we want, the conversation is becoming possible and comfortable.
That is correct.
And the gift to us is having a guest like yourself committed to solving this problem, who's able to articulate that. You know, we're coming up on the end of our program, and so this is your opportunity to look in your camera and tell everybody how to reach you.
Sure.
And why they should call you.
Okay. I can be reached at the SPTS office, which is phone number 732-410-7900. But I really do encourage you to check out our website, www.sptsusa.org. There is a multitude of resources for parents, for teenagers, and for school staff to access, generally absolutely free, and really important information to be aware of.
Dawn Doherty, thank you very much for being
Thank
our
you.
guest.
Thank you, Don.
Thank you so much.
Important message, and we
Very, very,
Yeah.
very important. Executive Director of the Society for the Prevention of Teen Suicide.
Yes.
Thanks all of you for joining us today on DisruptEDtv. I hope you can take some of what Dawn said today and use it. If you can prevent a tragedy like this, well, what a gift that would be. Thank you for joining us. We hope you'll join us again.
Yeah. See you next time.
Thank you.
Thank you, Don.
Great.
All right.
Really great.
Thank you. Thank you, guys.